Radioactive isotopes. So some isotopes of an element are going to be unstable or radioactive, meaning that they're going to decay spontaneously. An isotope is just any element that has more or less than the standard number of neutrons. So when these isotopes decay, they're going to give off energy in the form of either rays or subatomic particles. That energy that they are giving off is going to be energy that is moving through space, such as radio waves, light, heat, all of that is radiation. Like I said, some elements have isotopes, which can be stable, meaning they do not change over time, or unstable. They're going to emit radiation in order to regain a stable state. A lot of times they will either give up a neutron or try to give up an electron, give up either a neutron or pick up an extra a neutron to try and stabilize their nucleus. A radioisotope is going to be specifically an unstable radiation-emitting isotope. And radiation can be very harmful. It can cause the death of cells. It can cause DNA to break down and degrade. It can lead to cell death or mutations. It can lead to the formation of mutations that will lead to cancer. So radiation can be carcinogenic, but it can also be very beneficial. And as evidenced by its many uses in medicine. And so we're going to talk just a little bit about some of the beneficial uses of radiation. The radiation given off by radioactive isotopes can be detected in a variety of ways, and we can use that detection to date objects from the past, create images, and trace the movement of substances throughout the body. So for an example, we can use low-level radiation to trace the movement of items through the body. So the chemical behavior of a radioisotope is essentially the same as that of the stable isotope of the element, meaning that if we were to put iodine in the body, it's going to be taken up, absorbed, and used by the thyroid in a very specific way. If we were to inject radioactive iodine into the body, it is going to be taken up, absorbed, and used by the thyroid in the exact same way that non-radioactive iodine would. But the difference being that we can actually see and measure and detect radioactive iodine. This is fantastic. This means that we could put a very small amount of a radioactive isotope in a sample, and then it can be the tracer that can move throughout the body and can detect molecular changes in the body. A lot of times we're going to use this to image body's tissues and organs, and PET or positron emission tomography is a way that we can determine the comparative activity of tissues. Another great example of this, not just iodine, but radioactive glucose. Radioactive glucose can be injected into the body and then measured, determined where it goes. Certain parts of the brain are going to light up more than others, depending on their glucose needs and the presence of that radioactive glucose being found there. So we can actually learn a lot, not just about the structure of the body, but the function of the body, what areas are working well, which areas are not, by using these low-level radiation doses. We can also use high levels of radiation. Radioactive substances in the environment can harm cells, they can cause damaged DNA, they can cause cancer, but we can also use this very high level of radiation to treat certain things, such as cancer. Because yes, we can induce mutations through DNA damage, but we can also cause the DNA to damage so much that it causes cell death. So we can actually use those high levels of radiation. We can treat cancer cells, as cancer cells are even more susceptible to further damage by exposing them to very high levels of radiation. We can also use high levels of radiation for sterilizing medical and dental equipment and mail packages. We can actually sterilize equipment without changing its nature, without using chemicals like bleach that may leave behind trace residues, or without using other forms, or without using heat for things that maybe are susceptible to that. So just as an example, when I was in grad school, we used a specific hood for plating our bacterial cultures or for growing our tissue samples. And every time we finished using the hood for the evening, we closed up the hood and we turned on a UV light and just irradiated everything in the hood. Because unlike using heat, and yes, we can use heat to sterilize equipment, but we can't use heat to sterilize things like plastic pipettes or plastic tubes, anything that's made out of silicone. We can't use heat to sterilize. That will just melt it. And so we could use bleach potentially, but the chemicals could eat away at those plastics. And so the best way to actually sterilize the equipment is to use high levels of UV radiation that would kill any bacteria or viruses that were present. So it's very effective for sterilizing medical equipment. It actually can be used to sterilize food as well. You can expose fresh fruits and vegetables to high levels of radiation. It'll kill any bacteria that's found on the surface or any funguses found on the surface. It'll sterilize the food and increase its shelf life without using any harsh chemicals, or denaturing that food by exposing it to a high amount of heat. So yes, there's actually a lot of uses for radiation, or these radioactive isotopes, in everyday use. So here's just an example of how we can use radioactive iodine to generate images of a thyroid gland for diagnosing metabolic disorders. Here we have an image of a normal thyroid gland, but we can see that in the case of an enlarged thyroid gland, we can see that it's much more spread out. We can see that these clusters of the radioactive iodine are much more diverse. They're spread way farther than they need to be, and we don't have these nice centralized locations. So the iodine is not being taken up as quickly or as efficiently. It's not being absorbed as readily in this enlarged thyroid over here. And that's going to be it for our study on the nature of atoms. Please let me know if you have any questions or concerns, and I'll be happy to discuss it in one of our evening discussion groups. All right. Thank you.